Boker Tov. Daf Yomi is Nedarim Daf Lamed Vav Nedarim 36. Today's Daf Yomi. The Gemara is continuing from our discussion on Lamed Hey, on Lamed Hey, where the Gemara had asked the question: are these Kohanim who serve in the temple Shulchei Didan or Shulchei Dishmaya? Are the Kohanim our agents, or are they really heaven's agents? What a Geshra question! Who are the Kohanim working for? So the Gemara tried to bring, as the Gemara, first of all, what's the nafkamina? Why do we care whose agents they are? If we take a vow that we're not going to benefit from them, that they can't provide us any benefit. If they're our agents, then we can't benefit from that going. If they're agents of the Shemayim, then we can still benefit from them. They're not benefiting us, they're working for Shemayim. So Gemara tries to bring a proof from our Mishnah that it says that a person can bring a korban, even though a Kohen can bring a korban, even though you're not allowed to benefit from him. So it doesn't disprove that they're shulcha de shmaya. Doesn't disprove that they're agents of heaven. The Gemara says no. Actually, it's a proof the other way. It's a proof that there are agents, because and only in the case of a mechusar kapara, only in the case of the four specific cases where a person has to bring an additional korban after they go through the purification process in order to enter the temple and eat from the mikdash, the zav, the mitzvah, and the oedis, because it's not a kapara korban, but it's a matir, it's an allowance. And so therefore, in general, we wouldn't be able to have benefit from them because they're shulcha didan. It's just in this case that we can. So therefore, the Gemara seems to be saying at this point that they're shulcha didan. So now the Gemara challenges this concept on top of Lamed Vav Lamed Aleph. The Gemara challenges this concept that the Kohanim are our agents, that they are shulchei didan. So Masav Rav Shimi bar Abba on the top of Lamed Vav Lamed Aleph, Rav Shimi bar Abba cites a brayso because the brayso says in Haya Kohen Yisrael Kol Avdam Chataso. If the Kohen is a person who's not allowed to benefit from, Kohen can still sprinkle for him the blood of his chatas, the blood of his Hashem offering. So it doesn't disprove that they're shulcha dishmaya and not shulcha didam, because the Kohen's allowed to sprinkle the blood for korban. The Gemara says, no, what are we referring to? Dam chataso shel mitzora. The dam hashamo shel mitzora. No, this here also we're talking about the case of mechusar kipara, like we said that there are four Arba Mechusari Kippurim, that there are four who are Mechusar Kapara, and one of them is a Mitzora who has to bring an Asham and a Chatas. So this is talking about the Asham and the Chatas of the Mitzora. So therefore, it's not a proof that in general we say Shulcha Dishmai. It's just in this case. They'll say Zostias Torah Mitzora, because it says in the pasuk, this will be the Torah of the Mitzora, Ben Gadol Ben Katan. And just like you could sprinkle the blood for a katan who doesn't have das, so too you could do this you could sprinkle the blood of the asham and the chatas even for an adult who doesn't have das, and therefore it's proof that in this case is the exception that you can't prove from here that they are shulchei dishmaya. It's just in this case. So the Gemara then asks, Tanan, what about another proof? It says HaKohanim Shepiglu. What is mefagel? That there are four basic primary components of the sacrifice: the shlita, the kabbalah, the slaughter, the receiving of the blood, the halacha, the conveying of the blood, and the zrika, and the sprinkling of the blood. So if a person during any of those four primary actions of the korban has improper thought about when he's going to eat it, or of the korban chutz mizmano or chutz mimkomo, if he improper thought beyond the proper time or beyond the proper place, then we're going to say that is mefagel the korban, then becomes prohibited to eat the korban, prohibition from the Torah. So we say kohanim shepiglu b'mikdash. So a person brings his korban to the base of mikdash, and the kohen is mefagel it. If he has a wrong thought. If he does a mizidin, if he intentionally has the wrong thought, it means he knows he's not allowed of this improper thought. Chayavin, we're going to say that this Kohen has to pay the person, the owner of the Baal, he has to pay him the money. But Hashogegin, but if the Kohen didn't realize this was an improper thought, he accidentally did this, we're going to say that under those circumstances, Peturin, we're going to say he's exempt from having to pay. But it's still going to be a disqualified offering. So and the Ran explains that this is only a question on the case of the shogigs. But if you want to say that they're the agents of heaven, the Kohanim are the agents of heaven, that's why we would say that if he did this accidentally, he wasn't really representing us, he was still representing Hashem, and so therefore that makes sense to say why he's still able to disqualify it. But if you want to say that he's our agent, then why is he able to disqualify it? Why don't we say to him, I sent you to be my agent. I sent you to be my agent to do it the right way, not to mess me up. You shouldn't be able, if a person's not your representative, he shouldn't be able to prohibit your things upon you. And so therefore, is the question, how could you say he's shluchei didan if he's able to mess up the carbon? It must be that he's shluchei d'shemaya. So the Gemara answers no. It's exeris akosov. Pigel is based upon a verse. Shani gavi pigel. The case of the pigel is different. Amar kra lo yach lo yechashev lo. Says in the pasuk lo yechashev lo about pigel, meaning so you can't have had any thoughts. So we see from here mikol makom. Even if it was done b'shogeg, still going to disqualify him. So therefore, this is not indication of whether a shluchei d'shmaya or shluchei didan based upon this case from pigel. The Gemara says, let's go back to the sugya we had on Lamed Hey on the base. The Gemara said, Gufa, let's analyze the statement we had of Rabbi Yochanan, Hakol Tzruch Das. And if you want to bring a carbon on behalf of everybody else, you need to have their consent to the person you're bringing, Chutz Mimachusar Kapar, except for the case of the 4 cases of the people who are lacking atonement. We said these are the Zav, the Zava, the Mitzorah, and the Oedis. These 4 cases, the man who has the flow, the woman who has the flow, the Mitzorah, the leper, and the woman who is the Oedis, who gives birth. Because there, if you want to bring those karbanos to allow them to eat in the temple, and to allow them to eat the kachim and to enter the temple, there the karban is not a kapara, but it's a mati, or it's not an atonement, but it's allowing them to eat it. So it says Rabbi Yochanan, Hakol tzrich and das chutz mimachusar kapara. How do you know this? Shari Adam may be karban abanav. The person can bring a carbon for his sons. Because a person is allowed to bring a carbon for his sons and daughters who are minors. And the Gemara, the way the Rishonim understand this, the way the Rishonim explain this Gemara, is that we're saying that we're done in Efshar Misha. That were done in Efshar Misha Efshar. So meaning to say that the children, the minors, they're not able to bring the carbon. And so therefore, since they're not able to bring it, then in this case, the Kohanim bring it on their behalf, even though they're not able to have das. So therefore, even in a case where a person can have das, like the case of the Zav and the Zav, like the case of the adults who are a Zav or a Zav Mitzar Moedis, the Kohen should still be able to bring it without their knowledge. We're done in Efshar Misha Efshar. We judge a case where they can possibly bring it from a case where they can't possibly bring it. So that's the basic principle. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, a chatas is a term that the Gemara uses for a regular chatas that a person gets for eating chelev, the forbidden fat. So if that's the case, a person should be able to bring a carbon chatas for his friend even without the Baal's consent. Shekain adam maybe al ishto shota. Because if a person's wife is insane, a person's still able to bring the chatas on his behalf. Because of the statement, how do we know a person can bring the chatas for his wife? Rabbi Yehuda, like the statement that Rabbi Yehuda made. That Rabbi Yehuda said that earlier on that Rabbi Yehuda said back on the previous daf, that Rabbi Yehuda says Adam may be carbon asher al ishto v'kol karbanos shechayeves, so we see from here that Rabbi Yehuda says a person could bring a carbon for his wife, and so therefore, just like he could bring a carbon chatas for his wife, he should be able to bring a carbon chatas for everybody. So Alam Am Rebbe Lazar, if that's the case, why did Rebbe Lazar say so why did Rebbe Lazar say that you can't bring it for if you brought a chatas for somebody else? He did nothing because there's no das. So if that's the case, why does Rabbi why is Rabbi Yehuda saying you can bring it? If Rabbi Yehuda says you can bring it for your wife who's a shota, you should be able to bring it for everyone. So the Gemara says no. When Rabbi Yehuda says you can bring it for one's wife who's a shota, who's not of sound mind, what's the case referring to? If she had actually eaten the carbon when she was not of sound mind, if she had actually eaten the chayil when she's not of sound mind, well then she's not a bas carbon. She's not chayav to bring a carbon because she wasn't of sound mind. She's not even a shogeg. She's not even accidental. She's honest. She's completely under duress. It's not liable. And if she ate it when she was of sound mind and then she became insane, then also she wouldn't have to bring the carbon. Let's say she ate the fat, then she separated the carbon, then she became insane, and then she became healthy again. Puzzle. She's disqualified from bringing that carbon. That chatas is disqualified. So because once it's pushed off, it's disqualified forever. So we see from here that the case of the woman who is a shota bechatas doesn't exist. Why would he have to bring the carbon for her? So if that's the case, when it says that he brings a carbon on behalf of somebody who is his wife is a shota, that was not referring to a chatas chaylev. That was only referring to a carbon yoledes, and it was only referring to a case of the mechusar kippurim, and that's why you bring it. But in general, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't allow you to bring it for a woman for your wife who is insane, and so therefore we don't have a case for a chatas in general to say that you can bring a carbon on behalf of somebody who doesn't have das. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, according to you, who said that Rabbi Yochanan Shita is that we learn the efshar, the case of the possible, from the case of the efshar, from the case where they can't bring it. Let's bring another question on that position. Gemara says, a person should be able to bring a carbon pesach for his friend, even though his friend has not registered. We know that there's a general rule, you have to register for a carbon pesach. But a minor is required to, if a person brings a carbon pesach for his friend, for his minor, even though the minor is not registered. So he's registering the minor. So just like you can register the minor, you should be able to register an adult. So that's the Gemara's question. The Gemara says, a person should be able to register his friend for the carbon pesach without his knowledge, because a person could do this for his sons and his daughters who are minors. Why did Rebbe Lazar say Hifrish pesach al chavero lo asakum? Why did Rebbe Lazar say that if you separate a pesach for your friend, you've done nothing? Meaning to say, you need to have their das in order to register them. Why don't we say just like you can register a minor, or you can register your friend without their consent? So the Gemara explains, Amar Rabbi Zera, Sela beis avos lav d'oraisa. So he says that this idea that you need to register is not biblical. So what does this mean? So the Ran's explanation is that really we do say done in efshar mishi efshar, but why in this case of the pesach do we not do the sela beis avos lav d'oraisa, that this concept of sela beis avos is not biblical, meaning to say the Torah in a katanim tzrichen limanos peseh. Biblically speaking, you don't need to register the minors. So you're not required to register the minors at all. And so therefore you can't learn out an adult from a minor. So biblically speaking, the minor can eat from it even though he wasn't registered. The Ran says, the minor, there's no requirement to register a minor, biblically speaking. So therefore, you can't learn out an adult that doesn't need das for the registration from the minor. Gemara says, Umi Mai, and how do we know this? What's a source for this idea that a minor doesn't really need to be registered for the Korban Pesach? So the source for this is Midatanam from the Mishnah, which we had in Pesachim. Mishnah tells us, somebody says to his children, he says, I'm going to slaughter for the Pesach. And the assumption is we're talking about minor children. He says, I'm going to slaughter the Pesach to whichever one of you gets up first to Jerusalem. And Kivin Shechnis Rosho Rishon Rosho Verubo, once the first one puts his head and his body in the temple, Zacha B'chalko, he has into Jerusalem, Zacha B'chalko. He's the one who gets his share. Umezakes Achav Imo. And then once he gets in there, he's going to allow his siblings to eat with him. So therefore, what's the scenario we're talking about? And if you want to say that this concept that you need to be registered is biblical, of bisrakai, the animal's already slaughtered, and that's what the Ran says. The animal's already slaughtered, and if that's the case, he wasn't registered. And so how could it be umizaki? And how can he then say that the other children are going to also be included? The animal is already slaughtered. It doesn't make sense. That's the first explanation of the Ran. The second explanation of the Ran is meaning to say, how okay, we could say that the first one was possibly registered because the father did it through a concept of yesh breira. Fine, we could say that the first one was already registered, but how could the other ones get registered? So we see from here, from this point, that the children don't need to be registered. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, so if that's the case, that these children weren't registered, why is the father telling them to do it if they're all going to be included? So he just wants to do this concept of Kedei Zarazim mitzvahs. He wants to teach them, the father wants to teach the children, you have to rush to do a mitzvah. You can't be passive. I want to see you guys running to Jerusalem to do the mitzvah, the Korban Pesach. He was just trying to teach them to encourage it. And Tayanami Hachi, indeed, we have a brisa that says, Ma'isahaya v'kadmu banos lebanim. There was once an incident, and the father tried this, and the daughters got there before the sons. Nimtu banos rizos ubanim shafeim. And so as a result of it, it doesn't say that the daughters got it and the sons didn't get it. It means that the daughters were saying, yeah, good job, girls. You got here before the boys. That was only the point. But it wasn't, he was just trying to encourage them. When Eskavi and El Azari, just trying to encourage them, but not to say that you get to eat it and you don't, or you're registered and you're not. So the point is the children don't really need to be registered for the Korban Pesach. We're on top of Hamavav Beis. We had said in the Mishnah that if somebody's not allowed to benefit somebody else, if Reuven can't benefit Shimon, nevertheless he could be Torah Mestrumasa. He could take his tithe on his behalf. Gemara asked the question, a Geshna question. Somebody wants to take a truma, a Torah, wants to take a tithe from his own produce on his friends. He has bushel A of grain, and his friend has bushel B. Reuven's not allowed to benefit Shimon. But let's say in this case, he's Torah. Reuven wants to take a tithe from his crops and thereby exempt Shimon's crops from having to tithe. Does Reuven need to tell Shimon about this? Do we say keeping this chosuo because this is a chus? I'm helping you out. You no longer need to take a truma. Shimon doesn't need to know about it. Really can just do it. Or maybe we say mitzvah dilehi. This is Shimon's mitzvah. He's going to want to do it. And so therefore, since he needs to do it, it's his mitzvah. He wants to do it himself, and therefore Shimon should do it. So the Gemara says, Tashma, let's bring a proof from our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? Torah mes trumasa ves masrosa v'daito. That if Reuven's not allowed to benefit Shimon, nevertheless, he's allowed to take his truma and his meiser with daito. So the Gemara says, what with daito means with his consent. So what does that mean? What consent are we referring to? If you want to say that Reuven goes over to Shimon's bushels and he sees that Shimon's got 2 bushels there, and he wants to take a tithe from one of Shimon's bushels on another bushel. And with the consent of whom? If you want to say with Reuven's own consent, it doesn't make sense. Shimon didn't appoint him an agent. So you mean with the consent of the owner of the bushels, i.e. Shimon, how come well, you can't do that. Well, because Shimon is appointing Reuven as the agent, so he's benefiting from him. So that's not allowed. Shimon can't benefit from Reuven. So it must be that what's the scenario? Must be that Reuven is taking tithe from his bushel onto Shimon's bushel. And with whose consent? You can't say with the consent of Shimon because then Reuven is benefiting Shimon because he's his agent. It must be with his own consent. And so therefore, we see from here that he's taking a tithe from his own produce for his friends. Ve'ein omrim. And we don't say that you need the consent. And if you say you need Shimon's consent, he's benefiting. So it must be that you don't that you could take the truma for somebody else's produce without their consent. So Reuven could take Shimon's truma without Shimon's knowledge. Gemara says no. No, actually, we can't prove it from here. What's the scenario here? That Reuven could take the tithe from Shimon's produce for Shimon's produce, from Shimon's bushels, and he's taking a tithe for Shimon. But how could he do it if Shimon is appointing? If Shimon's appointing him, he's benefiting him. But Shimon hasn't appointed him. But what has Shimon said? Like Rava said in a different context, which we'll say in the Gemara coming up. The Shimon in this case has said, I'm allowing anybody who wants to come and take a tithe of my property. And Hachanami, and that's what's going on here. He says, whoever wants to come and take a tithe, take a tithe. So then Reuven can do it for Shimon from Shimon's bushels. So the Gemara says, let's say somebody says, I'm going to take a tithe from my produce, for your produce. Reuven says, I'm going to take a tithe from my bushel to exempt your bushel, and this is the tithe. Now the tithe now has to be given to the Kohen. Tova Sana Shalmi. Who gets the right of what's called Tova Sana here? Who has the right to give the gift to the Kohen? Reuven took the tithe, but he did it on behalf of Shimon. So who gets the right to give it out to the Kohen? Tovas, you could pick whichever Kohen you want to give it to. Tova Sana Shalmi. Mi Amrina, do we say you have peri dahayach mimitachna? Do we say without this bushel that Reuven was separating it, these crops would not be tithe? And so therefore, it's Reuven's right. Odilma, you have karya deahu. Or maybe we say without this bushel, we'll have in peri dahadin truma. Or do we say without this bushel, then this fruit wouldn't be able to be truma? And so therefore, for this reason, the Shimon should have the right because he's the owner of the bushel. You shall take the tithe from all the crops of your seed, and then you give the money, which proves from here that the one who has the right to give it is the Baal Akri, the owner of the bushel. He has the right to give the tithe. So the Gemara says, you mean to say you derived it from this verse? So the Gemara challenges this concept that Rabbi Zera is saying that the owner of the bushel has the right to give out the tithe because it says, Tori Mestrim what does it say in our Mishnah? That you could take the Truma and the Meiser with his consent. And if you want to say that once you take the tithe, that the owner of the bushel has the right to give it out to the Kohen, he has what's called the Tovas Hana. Well, you're actually, by doing this, by taking the tithe, you're now giving him the right to give it out to whichever Kohen he wants. So you're benefiting him. So it must be that if Reuven takes a tithe for Shimon, Reuven gets the one to give it out. Gemara says, no, what's that case our Mishnah is referring to? So we're talking about a case where the owner of where the crops are belonging to Shimon, where Reuven says, I can't give any benefit to Shimon, but this is Shimon's crops, and Reuven comes along and takes the tithe for Shimon from Shimon's crops, and where he said, and it's the case where we're talking about where Shimon had said, he didn't directly appoint Reuven, he said, whoever wants to come and take a tithe can come and take a tithe. The Amar Rabbi Abo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hamaftish, Mosif Chomesh, that one who consecrates something to the temple, adds a fifth. So what's the case there? That a person was maftish a carbon, an animal on behalf of somebody else, and now the animal got a mum, so it needs to be redeemed. So who's the one who needs to add the fifth when you redeem it? Is it the makdish or the person whose carbon it was? So the makdish has to do it. But if he consecrated carbon on behalf of somebody else, who has the ability, the efficacy to do it tamura, to exchange it? So that's the one who's the carbon is coming to serve as a kapara for him. That's the mislaper, is the one who could do the tamura, and somebody takes a tithe from his produce for somebody else's tova sana shalo. He gets to keep the tova sana. He gets to keep the benefit of giving it to the Kohen. He has the right of the tova sana. Okay, so this is today's daf, a beautiful daf. And happy to take questions.